Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, more escalation. The U.S. to send Ukraine longer range rockets. So the U.S. is preparing another major escalation of military aid to Ukraine as Reuters reports that the next arms package will include rockets that have a range of 94 miles, almost double the range of the munitions that Ukraine was provided for the HIMARS rocket systems. So this Reuters report cited two unnamed U.S. officials who said that the U.S. will provide Ukraine with the Boeing made ground launched small diameter bomb for the first time as part of an over $2 billion arms package that could be announced as soon as this week. So the official said that the GLSDB, that's this bomb, will be provided under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which allows the Pentagon to purchase arms for Ukraine. So that's instead of pulling the weapons from U.S. military stockpiles, that means that the Pentagon purchases the weapons, and that means it could take months or even years to deliver, as it involves contracts, and the weapons might need to be manufactured. But Boeing has been preparing for months to make this weapon for Ukraine. Reuters first reported in November that the U.S. was considering sending the munition. Boeing was pushing it, and they said that they could be available by the spring at the earliest, so just a few months from now. And the system has been in development since 2019. It's a GPS guided rocket. It combines small diameter bombs with the M26 rocket motor, which is widely available in U.S. military inventories. And that's how Boeing is pitching it. You have a lot of these rockets and a lot of these bombs. We could put them together and make this new weapon for Ukraine. Again, though, they have been developing it since 2019. So, of course, sending the longer range weapons risks provoking Moscow and comes after a series of new aid pledges for Ukraine that included the Bradley fighting vehicles, the M1 Abrams tanks. I left out the Stryker fighting vehicles. All these were just announced for the first time in the month of January. In these billions, arms packages worth over $5 billion were announced in that month. And each escalation of aid, it brings the US and Russia closer to a direct conflict. That's just the reality of the situation, and any direct conflict could quickly spiral into nuclear war. So this new weapons package that's going to be announced, again, it could be announced as early as this week. All the details aren't confirmed, though. It's going to include $1.7 billion in this Ukraine security initiative that's going to go towards these bombs, as well as Hawk air defense systems, counter drone systems, counter artillery radars, communications equipment, small surveillance drones, and spare parts for the Patriot air defense systems and the Bradley fighting vehicles. And the package could also include $400 million for the Presidential Drawdown Authority, and that's when they ship the weapons straight from the stockpiles. And that is going to likely include mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, the MRAPs, guided multiple launch rocket systems, and other ammunition. So the guided multiple launch rocket systems, that's the ammunition that the U.S. has been sending Ukraine for the HIMARS. They have a range of about 50 miles. This new bomb is going to have a range of about 94 miles. I'm not sure what system they're going to be fired out of, how exactly that works. But so far, the U.S. is still holding off sending the ATASMs, which could be fired out of the HIMARS, and they have a range of up to 190 miles. So the Ukraine's been asking for that for a while, but so far the U.S. is still holding out on that. But still, this is a significant escalation. Again, almost double the range of what the U.S. has sent Ukraine so far. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine says it will receive 120 to 140 Western tanks in the first wave of deliveries. So this was Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba. He said Tuesday that Ukraine expects to receive between 120 and 140 Western-made tanks in the first wave of deliveries. So Kuleba said, quote, "The tank coalition now has 12 members. I can note that in the first wave of contributions, the Ukrainian armed forces will receive between 120 and 140 Western model tanks. These are Leopard 2, Challenger 2, M1 Abrams," end quote. So the Leopards are the German, the Challenger 2 are the British tanks, and then, of course, the Abrams are the American tanks. And he said Ukraine is counting on France to provide its Leclerc tanks. I might not be pronouncing that right, but so far France has not pledged to send those tanks. Kuleba did not specify a timeline for when the tanks would be delivered, and it could take months or possibly years for the Abrams to arrive, as the Pentagon is purchasing the tanks from General Dynamics and they need to be manufactured. So when Berlin first announced last week that it would be sending its Leopard 2 tanks, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that the delivery would take about 3 months. Ukrainian forces also need to be trained on the tanks, and its forces currently only operate Soviet-made tanks. And Poland, they're going to send 14 of their own Leopard 2s to Ukraine, and they're saying that they want to cut down the training period on the Leopards to only 5 weeks. And there are Leopard training facilities in Poland. There's one in Poland, there's one in Germany, and there's one in Switzerland. So we should expect some of the training to happen in Poland. Germany is where the U.S. seems to be mainly training Ukrainians, although they're also training them inside the U.S. to use the Patriot air defense missile system. All right, the next one here. Egypt's foreign minister in Russia passes a message to Lavrov from Blinken. So Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Tuesday said that his Egyptian counterpart delivered a message from Secretary of State Antony Blinken calling on Russia to stop its war in Ukraine. Lavrov met with Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry in Moscow and told reporters that he conveyed a message from Blinken, and Blinken was just in Cairo. So Lavrov said, quote, "Russia is ready to listen to any serious proposal that is aimed at resolving the current situation in its comprehensive context," end quote. But it doesn't sound like it was that serious of a proposal from Blinken. According to Lavrov, the message said that Russia should quit in Ukraine, and that everything will be fine if they do so, which, is a nice thought, that Russia could just pull out and the war would be over. But it's not a realistic demand for the U.S. to make. So I think it shows, that Blinken is not really serious about any kind of diplomatic approach. And Lavrov said that Blinken omitted something from the message, and he pointed to recent comments from Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, who called for Russia's defeat in Ukraine this week. He's basically saying that's their real stance. So while U.S. and Ukrainian officials are demanding Russia withdraw from Ukraine, the condition, it's a non-starter for negotiations with Moscow. Adding to the unlikelihood of peace talks, Ukraine's foreign minister has called for war crimes tribunals as a precondition, and Moscow insists that any future peace deal must recognize the territory that it annexed as Russian. So again, the two sides are so far apart. And the State Department has abandoned diplomacy with Russia over the past year and has made no efforts to foster negotiations to end the war. None that we know of, at least. It seems like they haven't done anything. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, Blinken and Lavrov have only held one known call, and the conversation was about a prisoner swap, not about the conflict in Ukraine. A few months back, Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking U.S. military officer, said that the winter would provide a good time for peace talks. So there was a little hope there that the U.S. might actually do some things to get them talking. But reports at the time said that Blinken, as well as Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, disagreed, and they won clearly. Milley's view was not the popular view in the Biden administration. Again, the State Department being much more hawkish than the military. All right, the next one here. So this is from Human Rights Watch. They put out a thing calling on Ukraine to investigate their use of landmines, saying that banned landmines that Ukrainian forces have been using harm civilians. So it says Ukraine should investigate its military's apparent use of thousands of rocket-fired anti-personnel landmines in and around the eastern city of Izium, where Russian forces occupied the area. So it said that they documented numerous cases in which rockets carrying PFM anti-personnel mines, also known as butterfly mines or petal mines, were fired into Russian-occupied areas. And this is something that was reported by Eva Bartlett, who's a journalist that was in the Donbass, that these petal mines were, being shot all over the place over there. So now they're calling on Ukraine to investigate it. All right. So the next one here, we have a section here, a series of U.S. airstrikes all over the place. The first one, a U.S. drone strike targeted suspected Al Qaeda members in Yemen. So, a suspected U.S. drone strike killed 3 alleged Al Qaeda members in the Yemeni province of Marib. AFP reported on Tuesday, citing officials from the Saudi backed Yemeni government. An unnamed government official said, quote, 3 Al Qaeda members were killed in a strike by a drone that is believed to be American. The 3 were in a car in Wadi Obaida when they were targeted with the suspected U.S. strike that killed them immediately, end quote. So the Saudi-backed government still controls most of the Marib province, but the Houthis took control of some districts in 2021, a year that saw heavy fighting in the area. There was a lot of battles back in 2021 in Marib. Reports of tens of thousands of Houthis, killed in the fighting. And they did make some gains, but just based on the map, and I put in a map from South Front here, according to them, the drone strike took place in government-controlled area east of Marib City, and that's what other reports said as well. And you can see, if you're watching the video, that the green is the Yemeni Saudi-backed government, and then the purple is the Houthi-controlled areas. So now, since 2015, the U.S. has backed the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen in a conflict that has killed at least 377,000 people, and most of them died as a result of starvation and disease caused by the war and blockade. It's a very brutal war waged with brutal tactics. This coalition is waging on the country. But the U.S. still occasionally attacks Al Qaeda in Yemen, known as Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, even though the coalition that the U.S. backs is sided with Al Qaeda against the Houthis. The Houthis are a sworn enemy of Al Qaeda. A report from the Associated Press, and this is all. There's extensive reporting on how this coalition is on the same side of Al Qaeda and has recruited Al Qaeda to help its fight against the Houthis. It's not some conspiracy theory, it's true. A report from the Associated Press in 2018 found that the Saudi UAE coalition hired Al Qaeda members to help fight against the Houthis. The AP report said that the coalition-backed militias actively recruit Al Qaeda militants or those who were recently members because they're considered exceptional fighters. CNN reported in 2019 that U.S. arms sold to the UAE and Saudi Arabia ended up in Al Qaeda's hands in Yemen. CNN put out a very extensive report on this back then about how these weapons, U.S. weapons, were ending up in AQAP's hands. And right before the Obama administration backed the coalition against the Houthis in March 2015, the U.S. was actually cooperating with the Houthis against AQAP. In January 2015, the Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. had forged ties as part of a strategy to maintain its fight against a key branch of Al Qaeda. And that Wall Street Journal report was from January 29th, 2015. So just again, and then the coalition intervened in March 2015. So about a month, just over a month before the U.S. backed this coalition against the Houthis, the U.S. was cooperating with them against Al Qaeda. And here we see, this is the first reported U.S. drone strike in Yemen against Al Qaeda that I've seen in a while. So, people think that the terror war is over, but, there's a lot happening here. U.S. drone strike in Yemen. The next one here, U.S. drones support an assault on an ISIS affiliate in the Lake Chad Basin in Africa. So now, this is, again, according to AFP reported this, and I didn't see this anywhere else. A U.S. drone gave support to an assault against jihadists in the Lake Chad Basin region of Africa, and this assault involved the governments of Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger. AFP reported this on Monday. Again, sorry, I just said that. The report said that the militaries of the four nations announced the bombardment on Monday. They said it was an operation targeting a local ISIS affiliate known as the Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, and that the attack was launched in a forest area in Nigeria. The aim of this special operation was to neutralize the ISWAP bases in the Matari Forest. And that's from the statement that they put out. And that, again, that forest is in Nigeria. And if you're looking at the map here, you see the Lake Chad Basin is a pretty huge area in Africa, stretching all the way up to Algeria, down to Nigeria, over to the Central African Republic, Chad, a little piece of Sudan. So it looks like this operation was in northeast Nigeria there. And they said that 36 suspected of ISIS members were captured and that an encampment and bases were destroyed. The statement said that the bulk of the operation was carried out by troops from Niger and with the support of a drone from American partners. It's not clear how many strikes were launched by the American drone, and the U.S. has not confirmed its involvement. So we don't know how many drone strikes they launched or how many people were killed. They also didn't say that. And so far, the U.S. has not confirmed its involvement. There's a chance it was a CIA operation. So they just, they're unlike U.S. Africa Command, they don't put out press releases when they launch drone strikes or airstrikes in Africa. But the U.S. drone was likely flown from a U.S. base in the region near the central Niger city of Agaz, known as the Air Base 201 that was opened a few years ago. So towns in the area and other areas, in this vast region of Lake Chad, mostly centering around this area that they launched the strike in, this operation in, they come under attack from this ISIS group, and also Boko Haram has a presence in the region. And the four nations formed a joint military force in 2015 to fight the jihadists. And Nigeria has a history of killing civilians in its operations against Boko Haram and other groups. The Intercept revealed last year that the U.S. played a secret role in a Nigerian bombing of a displaced persons camp that killed over 160 civilians in 2017. That is a lot of people killed in this bombing, and that's from Nick Turse, who is one of the few people that does extensive reporting on the U.S. operations in Africa. Anyway, and another thing, Nigeria's president recently suggested that Western arms that are being poured into Ukraine are now helping fuel the conflict in the Lake Chad Basin. Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, he said back in November that weapons from Ukraine are ending up in this region. He said, quote, "Regrettably, the situation in the Sahel and the raging war in Ukraine serve as major sources of weapons and fighters that bolster the ranks of the terrorists in the Lake Chad region," end quote. So, okay, so two situations here. The U.S. drone strike in Yemen. They could have been bombing Al-Qaeda, who might have some nice U.S.-made weapons. And then over in Lake Chad, the U.S. is launching these drone strikes against these groups that might also be armed with some U.S. weapons that came their way. So anyway, the next one here, AFRICOM, so another U.S. airstrike. U.S. Africa Command says that 4 al-Shabaab fighters were killed in a Somalia airstrike. So they said this on Monday, and they said they conducted an airstrike on January 25th, so it was done last week. Also, that operation in the Lake Chad Basin, they said, was conducted at the end of last week. So anyway, AFRICOM said that this strike was launched at the request of the Somali government, the U.S.-backed government that's based in Mogadishu. It doesn't control the whole country. And they've been engaged in heavy fighting against al-Shabaab on the ground after launching an offensive a few months ago. The command said that the strike consisted of 2 separate engagements outside of a town in Somalia near the coast, about 246 miles northeast of Mogadishu. AFRICOM said that it was launched while the US-backed government was engaged with al-Shabaab. So, of course, they claimed in their initial assessment that no civilians were killed. They also said that 4 al-Shabaab fighters were killed in the strike. And now this is their new reasoning in their claims that no civilians were hurt is due to the remote location of the operation. That's what they say now. And that kind of hints to me that they're not even really checking because it doesn't matter because nobody cares. No, there's no media coverage. I didn't see any this again from a press release in AFRICOM. And just in my quick search, I didn't look too hard, but usually, you search U.S. airstrike in Somalia and some write up in Western media comes up. I didn't see anything on this one, nothing. So because of that, they don't even have to try to act like, they care about civilian casualties. So we don't know what's going on the ground. They could be killing civilians. And that's the same for the other 2 airstrikes that I just talked about. We don't know what's happening. We know the Pentagon lies about even if they know they killed civilians and that they are notorious for undercounting civilian casualties. So we always have to keep that in mind and really have to stress that point. All right, so the next one here. We're just escalation everywhere. The U.S. to ramp up military drills with South Korea. So the U.S. and South Korea on Tuesday agreed to ramp up joint military exercises, and this is a step that will raise tensions on the Korean Peninsula and likely provoke more North Korean weapons tests. The agreement was reached while Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was in Seoul and met with his South Korean counterpart Lee Jong-suk. They said in a joint statement, quote, the 2 leaders also pledged to further expand and bolster the level and scale of this year's combined exercises and training. They agreed to expand the scope and scale of combined field training exercises and to conduct a large-scale combined joint fires demonstration this year, end quote. So in 2022, North Korea launched a record number of missile tests as the U.S. and South Korea resumed large-scale war games for the first time since 2017. As part of the joint exercises, the U.S. deployed B-1 bombers to the peninsula for the first time in 5 years. Austin and Lee's statement said that there would be more deployments of U.S. bombers and other strategic assets in the future. The statement said, quote, the 2 leaders additionally pledged to closely cooperate in order to continue to deploy U.S. strategic assets in a timely and coordinated manner in the future, end quote. So South Korean leader Yoon Suk-yeol has been calling for greater nuclear cooperation with the U.S., suggesting that Washington and Seoul could conduct joint drills that involve U.S. nuclear forces. He's also suggested that the U.S. could redeploy nuclear weapons to the peninsula. They haven't been there since 1991. And he even suggested South Korea could acquire its own nuclear weapons. And it's not clear if the U.S. has agreed with any of his ideas, but the joint statement said that the 2 countries would increase nuclear deterrence efforts. So Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader, he recently ordered the exponential increase of his country's nuclear arsenal, and there has been concerns that he could soon hold his first nuclear weapons test since 2017. But the Biden administration, despite the tensions, despite these steps, they've shown no interest in taking a diplomatic approach to the heightened tensions. They're still demanding the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, which is a non-starter for talks with Pyongyang. A more realistic approach would be to offer some sanctions relief. They don't seem interested in that. So they're just going to keep escalating. And we're going to see more North Korean weapons tests in response. All right, so the next article here, NATO calls for a stronger partnership with Japan. The head of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization visited Tokyo on Tuesday and called for NATO to forge a stronger partnership with Japan as the alliance has its eyes on the region after labeling China a systemic challenge. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg met with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and hailed his plans to double military spending as part of a U.S.-encouraged buildup that's aimed at China. So I've talked about that quite a bit, that Japan is doubling its military budget. They're going to acquire long-range missiles from the U.S., breaking from, the country's post-World War II pacifism, as they call it. So Stoltenberg said alongside Kishida, quote, I strongly welcome these strategies and that Japan is raising its level of ambition, including with new capabilities. and your plan to reach the NATO benchmark of investing 2% of GDP in defense in 2027, end quote. So Japan, as part of all this, they recently released a new national security strategy that named China as, an unprecedented challenge, as they put it. And Stoltenberg said that he agreed with Japan's assessment of China. He said, quote, "Your strategy recognizes that China's behavior is a matter of serious concern. NATO agrees China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors, and threatening Taiwan, trying to control critical infrastructure and spreading disinformation about NATO and the war in Ukraine." End quote. So NATO issued its new strategic concept document last June, and that said that China poses a systemic challenge to Euro-Atlantic security. But the alliance made clear back in 2020 when they first put out a document that said they would be focusing on China. And that document said that they should forge stronger ties in the Asia Pacific with countries like Japan to counter Beijing. Stoltenberg also thanked Japan for sanctioning Russia and for providing support to Ukraine. A day earlier, he was in South Korea and he called for Seoul to step up its support for Ukraine by breaking from its long-standing policy of not sending weapons into a conflict zone. So he's pressuring South Korea to start sending weapons to Ukraine. He doesn't have any shame, this Stoltenberg guy. All right. So the next one here, the last one here, this is from Responsible Statecraft from, Connor Eccles. Congress will block F-16 sale if Turkey sinks Sweden's NATO bid. This is from Van Hollen, who is Chris Van Hollen, senator from Maryland, Democrat. He's saying that Congress is going to block this huge F-16 deal that Turkey wants, and that they could even add new sanctions if they follow through on threats to block Sweden from joining NATO. So he said, quote, "There's no scenario where the F-16 sale goes through without ratification by Turkey," end quote. And he's talking about the ratification of Sweden and Finland joining NATO, citing Turkey's unwillingness to levy sanctions against Russia and its threats to invade northeast Syria. The lawmaker said that Ankara is not a faithful ally. The news comes as the Biden administration is preparing to notify Congress of its intent to conclude a $20 billion deal to supply Turkey with F-16 fighter jets. The controversial sale has become more complicated since last week when Turkish President Erdogan pledged to block Sweden from entering NATO after a protester in Stockholm burned a Quran. And I've been going about covering that quite a bit. So we'll see how this all shakes out. But that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Ted Snyder. Has the war in Ukraine reached its climax? One from David Stockman, the GOP's impending great betrayal. One from Doug Bandow over at the American Conservative, the limits of number one. One from James Banford, China planted an FBI mole who gutted the CIA's vast spy network, about how the CIA spies in China were found out. And then our spotlight is from Matt Taibbi, Meet Hamilton 68, the new king of media fraud. Just this organization that basically made up all this stuff about, so-called Russian disinformation on social media and stuff. Just turns out to be a total hoax. But that's it for me for today. You could always help us out. I know we just finished our fundraiser, but if you ever want to support us, antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, share it around, all that. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.